Victoria Spartz's about-face on re-election. Wetlands protections further eroded, plus Todd Rokita's education eye, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending February 9th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, U.S. Representative Victoria Spartz reversed her decision not to run for another term in Congress. WFYI's Jill Sheridan reports the Republican legislator now joins a crowded field of candidates vying for the seat.
Spartz announced last year that she would not seek re-election in Indiana's 5th District, saying she wanted to spend more time with her family. Now the Ukrainian-born congresswoman says after talking to constituents and considering the current political environment, she feels her work is not done. In a statement, Spartz says, quote, "As someone who grew up under tyranny, I understand the significance of these challenging times for our republic." At least 8 other Republican candidates have announced their candidacies ahead of a filing deadline this week. Spartz was first elected to the 5th District that covers parts of Hamilton, Delaware, and Madison counties in 2020. Indiana's primary elections are on May 7th.
Will this reversal hurt Spartz's chances at re-election? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Lindsay Haake, Republican Mike O'Brien, Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief of Mirror Indy, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting Statehouse Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Lindsay Haake, how will voters feel about this?
Well, I guess we'll tell, and more importantly, how will primary voters feel? All is fair in love, war, and primaries. But I'll tell you, the only tyranny here, for me at least, is an ineffective, indecisive legislator who clearly sees her name dimming in the lights and just simply wants to get back in. I just don't see, as a former constituent whose emails were never answered, it's really tough for me to have any inch of reason to support the woman.
I'm of two minds about how voters will view this, or really how it will affect her chances. Because on the one hand, you got to think the flip-flopping decision-making makes her seem a little erratic, along with a lot of the other things that she says and does. But on the other hand, how many people are going to go into the polling place not knowing about all of that and will just go, oh, I recognize that name?
Well, that's what gives you, that does give her an advantage in an 11-way primary. But
Agreed.
Primaries also are, they're small elections. They're small groups of people that talk a lot. So you'll have 10 other people out there talking about this, including Chuck Goodrich, who was one of her biggest supporters. And who got in kind of as with her blessing. So that's even more bizarre about this, that he kind of got sold out by her, and she pulled is pulling the rug out from under him. We'll see if it makes a difference. He's already put $1 million of money into the. I mean, like real decisions have been made. He's a sitting office holder who now can't go back and run for his state house seat. If we knew this 6 months ago. Well, now you got some different decisions to make. You're not setting $1 million on fire. Maybe you run for the state rep again and then put this off for another day. So it's unfortunate. And we were hearing it for weeks, though, that she was back and forth, that she was in these rooms and out in D.C. telling her colleagues in Congress that she was actually running again. But then, as early as 2 hours before she announced she was going to run, said she wasn't. To Chuck Goodrich. So I mean, it's bizarre.
To that end, is this about to get real nasty up in that primary?
I think so. It sounds like it, because you have what sounds like could be inter-party disagreements. I won't say fighting, I'll just say disagreements.
Oh, I'll say fighting. Yeah, I mean, it feels like it.
I will say disagreements, but definitely seems like there's turmoil in the party. Voters, are they going to be served by her? I think that would be my concern as a voter. Am I going to be best served by someone who seems to go back and forth? Does she really want to serve in this capacity or not? But the party, definitely, there's going to be a lot going on in the Republican Party.
And let's talk about that a little bit, which is, as a voter, as a constituent of hers, this isn't the only time where her decision-making doesn't seem to be clear all the time. She's, I think it's fair to say, a wild card when she's voting out in D.C. Yeah. You're never quite sure where she's going to be on an issue until right towards the end. Are there some voters who are going to like that, though, about her?
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of sort of average voters will know about the flip-flopping. I think what's more important is that she's burning so many bridges. And even if she is reelected, I'm not sure how effective she'll be. Mayors are coming out against her in her own district.
Her own town.
Yeah, exactly.
And
The same day she announced.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think she's put herself in a terrible position, as well as all those other people who made decisions based on her word.
All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is, will Victoria Spartz's about face on running for re-election hurt her with voters? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you whether some child care regulations should be loosened to improve access to child care. 65% of you say yes, 35% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, a controversial bill that would reduce protections for the state's wetlands is headed to Governor Holcomb's desk this week. It's been called a compromise, but the history of Indiana's wetlands law, as well as testimony from wetland experts and advocates, suggests it's anything but. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports the bill would lower the number of wetlands that could fall into Class 3, the only class that didn't lose significant protections when the state changed its wetlands law in 2021.
That change also created a wetlands task force to find balance between advocates, regulators, and developers. But the member representing home builders didn't show up to the meetings. Now, 2 years later, the State Department of Environmental Management and developers say they've struck a compromise in this latest bill. Yet wetland advocates and experts say they weren't consulted. Republican Senator Sue Glick applauded IDEM's work to bring clarity to developers in light of a U.S. Supreme Court decision. Still, she didn't vote for the bill.
I think it has some serious shortcomings which might have been resolved had everyone been a part of the discussions.
After about 3 years of debate, it's unclear when Indiana will reach a true compromise with all stakeholders at the table.
Mike O'Brien, are you buying that this is a compromise?
It's like passing a ban on guns and asking if you consulted the NRA. It's like, why bother? What's the point? Remember where this started. This started because IDAM came down on a farmer who was replacing a drain tile in a field that he'd been farming for 100 years. And so when you have that kind of overreaction, what we have seen in the last 4 years is a reaction to that, including this. So I think there were 8 Republicans who voted no on this and think maybe, okay, clearly that situation 4 years ago was too far, but maybe now we've crossed the line the other direction. They'll find the balance somewhere, but it does need to be reminded of folks that we are still with this bill in the top 6 regulated wetland states in the country. Having a state-based wetlands program already puts us ahead of the majority of states. So the hyperbole and the alarmists on the environmental left is predictable, but I think they're trying to find a place where, how do you find a rational regulatory environment that protects a guy who wants to develop his land and the environmental impact of that development.
Lindsay, I think you would be someone who's classified as the environmental left. Do you think it's alarmist to say that this is going to harm wetlands in Indiana?
No, absolutely not. That's frankly, that's a dog whistle. I'm sorry, I got to call you out on it. If that were the case, if this were simply an issue of a tile being replaced on a farmer's land, then I don't think we'd see the building association and the apartment association in the hallways watching this bill just come through and sail through over the House. I'm sorry, but I've got to throw the special interest
That'd be
into
because
this.
of our housing crisis and the
That's
environmental regulations.
That's also, I'm sorry, but that
away.
being co-opted also is incredibly convenient. So the reason this is of topic is because Indiana has so many wetlands, and our beautiful, all of our land is just besotted with them, and that's frankly an opportunity to give us a great resource that we've got that's our best resource, and that's our water. So for it to be thrown into a conversation about a compromise, I reject that.
The thing about that I think sometimes is missed, because I think the average person goes, oh, environmental concerns, that's overblown. This is about improving protecting us against floods. It's about filtering our water, which we talk a lot about water in the last year or so in this state, and we'll continue to for a while here. Is that message not getting through to lawmakers necessarily on this one? Because it does seem like, to Mike's point, we've talked about this before, it feels like the pendulum has swung a little far in one direction on this.
Yeah, I think this is one of those issues that's hard to really show an immediate impact. Like, saying, well, if we get rid of wetlands, we're going to flood more. That's like in the future, and it's conceptual, and we don't have any proof per se, and so
also flooding more, just generally.
Yeah,
Flooding, like,
and so I think it's just hard to really pin down an exact impact and get people to buy into it.
You poll on stuff like this, and people say that. But it's really, to your point. You say, yes, I care about the environment, I'm concerned about the environment, I'm concerned about flooding, I'm concerned about climate change. But on the other hand, the other side gets to go, oh, but we need more houses. Is that part of the sort of disconnect over this bill too?
Yes, houses or warehouses. What are we actually going to build? I think part of it is too that, like you said, we don't really know what's flooding, what's more flooding, what does that look like? What do wetlands really do? I don't think the average person really knows what wetlands do. I'm the average person. I know a little bit about wetlands. I know we do need them. So I do think that it is, but it took me a while to kind of learn about wetlands and do a lot of research, and I don't know if the average person is going to do that, but it does seem short-sighted because as we continue to decrease the wetlands, we're going to see more repercussions, and we may not understand those until they happen. That's the problem.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned something right at the end, which was, we may still need to find more of a balance on this issue. But is it going to be too late? Like, is it already too late?
I don't know. We do need to find a balance on that issue, given where we rank in terms of these regulations now. We'll see what the impact is. But even when, was it Senate Bill 389, I think,
Yes.
in
2021.
Passed, of the 600,000 plus acres of wetlands, how many did we lose? A fraction of a percent. This was not an extreme reaction.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing, though, to keep the wetlands. It's not.
No, what I'm saying is, like, what Lindsay would argue, I think, what she just argued, is that these bills go far the other direction, to the point where we don't protect wetlands. So that's just not been proven to be true, at least in Senate Bill 389.
And there are bills that part of that legislation as well, another legislation is sort of at least for the first time that I can remember, trying to give at least some incentive to protecting and preserving some wetlands too.
Conservation has been a great hallmark call to action from both parties. That's and that's essentially what that's why you had some groups involved in this that weren't at the table before, or who were brought into the table as we shoved towards the governor's office to ask to veto during 389. You had folks come into the conversation like Audubon Society. You had, these are national groups that weren't previously noticing hadn't previously been targeted in this way. And so that, absolutely.
All right. A controversial program launched by Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita allows anyone to submit to a public online site examples of race, gender, and political ideology being taught in schools throughout the state. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Violet Kober-Weiland reports some school corporations and districts are already expressing concerns with documents on the portal.
The Eyes on Education platform allows all Hoosiers to view submitted photos, screenshots, and presentation materials from districts and universities across the state that the office describes as potentially inappropriate. In a statement, the Office of the Attorney General says it will investigate materials and complaints submitted to the portal. Several school districts with materials featured on the portal have since released statements calling the information outdated and incorrect. Other districts, including Noblesville Schools, say they were not aware of the site or the documents on it prior to its release. Some districts have also expressed concerns about how this type of information may affect teaching environments and may cause teachers to feel less supported. The Indiana State Teachers Association said in a statement this portal will create division between parents and educators and would target public schools.
Niki Kelly, does it appear, at least initially, that these submissions were vetted in any way?
From talking to the Attorney General's office, what we were told is they vetted kind of where they came from, like who they came from. They're real people who submitted them. But they didn't go to the schools and say, is this real? And look, there are some documents on there that are very clearly what we would call primary documents. They say at the top what school district it is, whatever, it's a primary document. But there are a lot of other submissions that are just random. There's like a picture of a quiz.
A blurry screenshot of a screen, of a computer screen.
Or a quiz It doesn't say what school district it's from, what grade it is, there's no context, or here's a picture of a classroom where a flag hangs. How do I know that's a classroom in Kokomo? How do I know that's not in Nevada? So I do think there are some questions about some of the other items up. There's one against IU Medicine that is literally just, at
Here's
some point
things
in
I
it.
heard.
Yeah, exactly. They're
Suspect
literally
at
like,
best.
I heard from a person, not even naming them, that this, and it's like, that's
This
totally
might happen.
hearsay. Yeah.
Other than Todd Rokita wanting attention, which you have to, say
Always build
most,
in.
yeah,
Always
most,
start with.
That's the floor. What in your mind is the point of this?
That's what I've been wondering. But I want to go back to the vetted question for really quickly, because I also want to know, is this true? Just because it's a real person and doesn't mean it's actually true. So when I think of vetted, I think of, is this actually true? But I also want to know, what is the purpose? What are you going to do with this information other than just putting it out here and creating confusion and drama? That's all it seems to be to me, is creating confusion and drama. I don't see a real purpose behind it. So I'm very curious to know what's going to happen with this. Are teachers going to be fired? School districts held accountable to what? It just seems very confusing, other than a new way to create conflict between teachers, school districts, and their communities.
Let's even go beyond the is it even true? Like, let's the one with the quiz, because there were a couple things submitted from that quiz site. And so something like that caught my eye, because context feels like it matters here. So I'm familiar with that site because I think it's a really interesting tool. It's a site available for anyone, and it's been around for, years and years, where you can answer questions on a range of political positions and issues. And at the end of it, it would tell you, here's where you kind of
where you fall.
Here's where you fall on the ideological spectrum. In the past, like around presidential campaigns and races, it said, okay, here's who you align most with. And like on a percentage basis, you align most with X, Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump or whatever on either end. I think that's a really interesting tool that I could see being useful in a government class in high school. But the way it's presented online is, they asked about abortion, how dare they? And they're teaching abortion or something like that. What are we doing?
I don't know. That's the question I had. What is the point? And you do have to make the assumption that the point is to just set this on fire. It's like a bad Facebook group. You're just going to have this unchecked stuff being said, people fighting with each other. It's like, I'm like, why do this? Other than you're just trolling the far right that it's constantly offended and thinks they're constantly under attack.
So obviously you're working for Destiny Wells as a candidate for Attorney General on the Democratic side, but obviously this speaks to Todd Rokita's base, but is he going to start really pissing off like folks who are going to be voting in a general election a few months from now, who are just sitting in their school districts going, what the hell is this guy talking about?
I think we're already there. I think this is, as Hoosiers, as Hoosier women, we're already used to our rights being taken up for discussion and up for grabs. We saw that in the special session with SB 1 in 2022. So, I'm not surprised that my kids are now being weaponized too in this conversation, and that this is just another campaign opportunity for Todd Rokita. And so I realize that sounds a little partisan, but Mike's here to make my points for me on this.
The last point I'll make is he's also going to win by like 15 points. so the early prediction.
Well, we shall see.
All right, medical providers say prior authorization creates administrative burdens for them and barriers to care for their patients. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports a GOP priority bill that would have heavily limited the use of prior authorization died in the first half of this year's session.
Prior authorization refers to the process where insurance companies may require pre-approval before they will cover medical services. The author of the bill pointed to prior authorization as a barrier to receiving care for many Hoosiers. But Senate Republican leader Roderick Bray says lawmakers are being careful with what they're doing fiscally, with the $1 billion Medicaid shortfall adding pressure.
We've been working in the space of healthcare costs kind of feverishly over the last few years, and there is some concern about whether this will add to costs.
Bray says it's good legislation, but the bill in its current form will not come back this session. He says some of the reporting requirements might appear in other pieces of legislation.
Oshia Boyd, this was quite a piece of legislation, but are you surprised that nothing of it has made it through the first half?
I will never use the word surprised. Confused, befuddled, confounded maybe, but not surprised. Especially since it was a priority bill, that nothing came from this. I think what does surprise me, I guess I can say, is the fact that we know that prior authorization is annoying at best, cumbersome at best. For many Hoosiers, it is a delay in life-saving treatment. So as we've been talking about healthcare and things and ways to improve healthcare, that nothing came of this is a lot disappointed, should say, not a little, but very much disappointed in that nothing moved from this bill. That was a priority bill. So, and we're using the Medicaid, and we don't want the deficit of Medicaid to affect that. Now, I would like to know how. I want a little bit more information about how do you think this will affect it. Are you saying this because you think maybe prior authorization will stop people on Medicaid from having surgeries or some life-saving treatment immediately? So you want to kind of delay that to save money? I'd like to know more about what's going on, because I think we haven't really heard the truth about why the bill didn't move.
Well, to that point.
I was going to say, I can take that one if you want.
Well, but to that point, though, this bill was in committee, sailed out of committee, then never appeared in appropriations.
No.
So we've never really we've never really had that
Right.
debate in a public way so far this session.
I mean, that's the crazy part, is that they just gave up on it like so easy. They didn't even try on that one. Like, why would you put it out there if you weren't going to fight for it? Now, I do think the concern on the Medicaid side is that, let's put it, prior authorization stops some procedures and tests and things like that. Some of them are needed. Obviously, I think over time, maybe some aren't. And so their concern is that if all of a sudden there's nothing backstopping that, we're going to have a lot more procedures, tests that the state is going to have to pay for through Medicaid that were being blocked by prior authorization.
We asked Rod Bray this, if the Medicaid shortfall didn't exist, if we didn't just find out we have a $984 shortfall in Medicaid, $94 million shortfall in Medicaid, is the conversation on this bill very different? He said, absolutely. Do you think that's true?
I think the entire conversation around healthcare in the State House has been is the elephant in the room, frankly, and this plays into it. You've got the, frankly, unfolding human services tragedy that is the attendant caregiving issue that tanked House Bill 1386, which is the FSSA agency bill. I've been, this is my 17th session, and I've never seen an agency bill fail like that, not even be heard. And so it is an underlying issue that will affect this bill, and maybe already have. Maybe that's why this bill didn't move forward, because it was another bill that had the statute open that we could attack and try to get something done about this FSSA drama that's leaving disabled kids.
It's the money.
Oh, well.
But is that going,
let's talk about that,
So obviously it's a non-budget session, but even in next year's budget session, it feels like right now lawmakers are operating from a place of fear about the budget implications of Medicaid and the fact that it's growing so much. Is that going to change between now and a year from now?
No, on this bill, the problem with this bill is it came out on a Friday and it was heard on a Wednesday morning, and nobody had any data. The state couldn't really answer. They're like, this is going to have an impact, but what's the impact going to be? We'll have to get back to you. And it's like, well, you have 5 more days, and that's the problem with the short session and not vetting this thing in June instead of, the second week of January. In the Medicaid program in particular, we've been talking about the money a lot. Prior authorization in the Medicaid program is more like a heads up to the managed care companies that are responsible for managing that member. So they have to know if a woman is going into the hospital to have a baby. Yeah. Like, they have to know that, and they have to know that because they're providing a lot of other services around just the paying for the delivery. Now we got to make sure the SNAP benefits are turned on for the kid, that that kid has coverage, that we're doing follow-up care, because no one goes to one doctor anymore who has a complete view of the continuum of all the care they're receiving. And so I kind of think about prior authorization the way Winston Churchill thought about democracy. It's like the worst system except all the other ones. And the insurance industry, of which I work in, is paying the price for this clunky system that no one's put any real effort into making any better.
All right, finally this weekend is, of course, the Superb Owl, the Super Bowl. So real quickly, starting with Lindsay Haake, who are you picking?
Who's playing?
The Chiefs and the 49ers.
Okay.
Really filling in for Andelina.
Taylor
who would
Swift
have the
Bowl?
exact same question.
Taylor Swift wins.
Taylor Swift. Well, that's often the case.
If I don't say the Chiefs, I've got a 15-year-old daughter that's going to not be very happy.
So I'm going to go with the 49ers.
49ers. You don't like the 49ers,
I
we know,
know, I
as a Bengals
cannot
fan.
support the 49ers. They beat my Bengals twice in the Super Bowl, so go Chiefs.
And I got to say, I think the 49ers are the better team, but I'm tired of picking against the Chiefs and seeing them win because they just, I mean, Patrick Mahomes is just a wizard. He pulls things out of that
I'm
hat.
just still getting over the Lions loss.
That's fair enough. That's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Lindsay Haake, Republican Mike O'Brien, Oseye Boyd of Mirror Indy, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcasts and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.